Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the third installment of our Advent series on the Jesse tree. Tonight, I want to tell you a story from the book of Ruth. We're going back in time a little bit here, back before the two stories that I've told you up till now, to someone really kind of amazing who comes a little bit earlier. I'm going to start off this story by telling you about somebody else, a woman named Naomi. Naomi was a Jewess, a Hebrew woman, and she married a man named Elimelech. And they had two boys, Mahlon and Chilion, and they lived in the land of Judah. And a terrible famine came on the land. And they were not able to feed themselves, and so they decided for a while they would move to the land of Moab, where there was food. And so Elimelech and Naomi and their two sons moved off to Moab. Well, as it happened, the famine lasted longer than they planned, and they stayed there for some time. And the two boys ended up growing up and marrying Moabite women. Orpah and Ruth were their names. Sadly, in time, Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died. And then unexpectedly, both Mahlon and Chilion, Naomi's sons, also died, leaving her alone with her two daughters-in-law. And this was very sad for them. Then she heard that back in the land of Judah, things were better. There was food again, and so Naomi decided, that she would go home. And the two girls, Orpah and Ruth, decided that they would go with her. And as they were packing up, they began to walk with their things out toward town, and Naomi said, "No, it's no good. Never mind. You know, I'm not going to have any more children. You're already grown. Even if I had a husband right now and had children, you couldn't wait for them to grow up. You should stay here where you have a future and find other husbands, and may you live in peace in their house. Girls, don't come with me. Stay here in your land. Just let me go." And both the girls were crying, and they both professed that they did not want to leave Naomi, that they wanted to stay with Naomi. And Naomi was adamant, "No, you should stay here where you can make a life for yourself, and just let me go." And Orpah agreed, and she, with tears in her eyes, streaming down her face, kissed Naomi on the cheek, and then she turned around and went back home. But Ruth said, "I will go where you go, and your people will be my people, and your God will be my God." And together she and Naomi made the long journey back to Israel. And when they arrived back home in the town of Bethlehem, pay attention to that name, people said, "Can this be Naomi who left here?" And Naomi said, "I don't want to be called Naomi anymore. Call me Mara," which means bitter, because God has turned his hand against me and my life is bitter. Everybody was very surprised to see her. And word traveled fast that Naomi had returned. She had brought with her a young woman, a Moabite woman, named Ruth. And very quickly they found a place to stay. And not long after, Ruth said, "My mother, I need to find some way of helping to feed us. I'll go out into the fields and collect grain." Now, there was a custom at the time that poor people could come along and collect the grain that fell during the harvest. When the men came along and cut the sheaves down and stacked them up and were harvesting the grain, whatever spilled out on the ground could be collected by the poor, and they could have that as their food. So you weren't supposed to knock down the barley and then tie it up in sheaves and then go along and rake up all the scraps. You left those. And Ruth went out into the fields at the beginning of harvest time to collect the scraps of grain that she could find in the fields. Unbeknownst to her, she wandered into the field of a man named Boaz. And there she was collecting grain when Boaz, the master of the land, came along. And he stopped and he said to the men, "The Lord is with you." And they said, "And the peace of the Lord be with you, Boaz." And he said, "Who is this young woman, this stranger in my field?" And they said, "This is Ruth, the daughter-in-law of the Moabite woman, the Jewess Naomi, who was married to Elimelech, who died." And he looked at her and he said, "Men, make sure that she gets grain. And not a one of you is to touch her. Don't lay a hand on her. You leave her alone. Don't fuss at her. Let her collect the grain. And if some falls out of the sheaves, let her have that too. Just let her collect what she needs." And Ruth looked at him with wide eyes and she said, "Thank you so much." And she bowed deeply in appreciation for this generosity, his favor to a stranger. And she said, I am exceedingly grateful, and I don't know why I, a stranger, have received favor in your sight." And he said to her, "When you get hot and thirsty, feel free to go over to the jars of water where the workmen get a drink, and help yourself there too." And he said, "And when it's time to eat, come and eat with us." And so when mealtime came, Ruth came also to the tent where the food was, and Boaz made sure she had a place to sit and invited her to dip the bread into the dip that they had there on the table and made sure that she had enough to eat. And she ate quickly and went back out into the field. Ruth was a very hard worker. And she worked there all of the rest of the day until it was time to be done. And by the time she had finished, she had collected a really nice collection of grain. And she knocked it out on the threshing floor and she put it in a bag and she went home. And when she got back with all this grain, Naomi said, "Where did you get so much grain? This is amazing." And she told her, she said, I was in the field of a man named Boaz, and he treated me so kindly, and he was so generous, and he made a place for me at the table, and he told the workmen not to bother me, but to let me have anything I wanted. She told him all about it. And Naomi said, "This is amazing. Boaz was related to my husband, Elimelech, and he is one of our kinsman redeemers. This is amazing." And Naomi was very glad. And every day after that, Naomi went out to work, always into the field of Boaz. Naomi had told her not to go anywhere else, but always to the fields of Boaz. And every day she worked. And everyone noticed how faithful Ruth was. She was a hard-working girl. She was diligent. Every day she worked hard. She took short breaks. She was strong. And she was charming and smart and likable. And everyone liked Ruth. And she worked there all throughout the harvest season, collecting grain for her and Naomi to eat. And every day she would take it home, and then she would make dinner for her and Naomi so that they both had enough to eat. The harvest season was coming to a close. And Naomi's mind turned to what was going to happen next. They had saved up a small sum of grain, enough to last them a little while. But it wasn't just the food that was on Naomi's mind. Ruth was a young woman, a woman without children, a strong, smart, charming woman who would make a good wife and mother. And Naomi was concerned. We need to find a home for Ruth and a husband and a family. She waited till Ruth came home one afternoon, and she said to her, "Ruth, we need to settle your situation. you can't always just stay here with me taking care of an old woman. We need to find something for you, someone for you. And Ruth tried to put her off. Mother, I'm happy, I'm fine, things are good, we're taken care of. But Naomi told her to shush and just to listen. And she said, what do you want me to do? Naomi said, tonight is the harvest feast in Boaz's fields. When the feast is done and Boaz has had his food and his drink, he'll go and he'll find a place to lay down and rest and sleep for the night. I want you to get all cleaned up, wash yourself and clean yourself up. And after Boaz goes and stretches out and finds a place to sleep, I want you to come along and I want you to lay down at his feet. And what then? Said Ruth. He'll tell you what next, said Naomi. Well, Ruth did exactly as Naomi had said, though she didn't quite know exactly what was going to happen. After the harvest feast that night, Boaz, who was feeling very happy with all the food and the good wine, and having accomplished this good work and having a good harvest, went and he found a spot near the threshing floor, and he stretched out on the ground, made himself a little pallet there, and he went very happily to sleep. And when everyone was asleep and no one was watching, Ruth came tiptoeing along, and she came and she laid down at his feet, and she pulled the covers off of his feet, and she kind of curled up right there. And in the middle of the night, Boaz had been working all day. He was tired. He didn't notice right away. In the middle of the night, something startled Boaz, and he jumped awake. And he looked down, and he said, who is that? And Ruth said, it's your servant, Ruth. And Boaz said, God bless you, dear. You could have chosen a younger man, any other man that you wanted. But you chose me. God bless you. And she said, would you spread a little bit of your cover over me so I'm not so cold? And he spread a little of the cover over her, and she laid there at his feet. And early in the morning, before anyone was awake, she got up and she tiptoed away. And Boaz had said, I'll see to things. Ruth went home to Naomi and told her everything that had happened and exactly how it had played out. And Naomi said to her, don't you worry. Boaz will see to everything. He won't rest this day until he's settled the matter. Now, a kinsman redeemer was someone who had the legal right to marry the wife of a brother or a cousin who had died and to buy his land. He had the first right to do that. And Boaz was kinsman redeemer for Naomi and therefore for Ruth, but not the first one. There was someone closer to Naomi in the family than Boaz who had the first right. So Boaz went out to the gate of the city where the business was done, and he sat down, and every time he saw one of the older men of the city, a leading man, walking by, he would call him and say, come and sit down, I've got a piece of business I need you to witness here. And he did that till he collected 10 men of the city. And then he saw the man who was closer to Naomi, the first kinsman redeemer, walking by, and he said, friend, come here, it's good to see you. Please come and sit down. I've got something I want to talk over with you. And the man came and sat down, and he said, what is it, Boaz? And he said, as you know, Naomi, the wife of Elimelech, came back to Bethlehem not too long ago. And she's going to sell the lands that belonged to her husband all those years ago. And you are the kinsman redeemer who's closest. You have the right of first refusal. And so I wanted to see if you wanted to buy the land. Because if you don't, then I'd be happy to take it off your hands. And he said, oh, I'd like to buy the land. And so they're busy talking about all of the details of it. And then Boaz said, oh, I just remembered something that I forgot to mention before. If you buy the land, Ruth, the Moabite woman, comes with it, and she becomes your wife. Oh, said the man. Well, I can't do it then. I can't do it because then that might endanger the inheritance my own children get from me. I'm not going to be able to do it. Boaz, would you be able to take care of it for me? And Boaz said, yeah, I can do that. I can take care of it. I'll do it for you. And so back then, the way you signified that the contract was accomplished instead of a handshake or signing something was you took off your shoe, your sandal. And sometimes you'd pitch the thing. So they took off their sandals and they signed the contract. And in this way, Boaz made Ruth his wife. And he brought her into his home, and he brought Naomi along with him, and they took care of her like a beloved mother. And not too long later, Ruth was pregnant. And then she had a baby, a little boy named Jesse, the father of David the king. And next week I'll tell you the life of someone else in the line of David. God bless you all.